Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Your Name. For a long time, I've thought that the body swap concept would make for a good movie, and most of the time it hasn't. It's usually done in a very cliched, more, family comedy kind of way for whatever reason. Although the idea of body swapping with someone of a different age or a different gender opens up all sorts of questions about identity and sexuality that most of these films aren't really interested in. They're just interested in, like, how could this daughter be a mother? Oh my god! And it doesn't really go much deeper than that. It kind of skims the surface of it a little, but basically they don't. Your Name is probably the best body swap film I can really think of. In the beginning, it's really already probably the best body swap film I've ever seen, and ends up saying even more than just being excellent. It's saying things about identity and poverty and the kind of family you have, and swapping that can show you a very different perspective that you're not used to, and how that will change your perspective, because I think a lot of people don't think about how much of their perspective and their experience has to do with their gender, their background, the money they have, the status, the position in life that they have, the one that they're not even thinking of, and then having that swapped out with someone all suddenly, how that will inform their life and change their life and make them for the better and even more mature. And it already has all of that in it, but then it seems to be able to even say other things about identity and poverty and even some environmental issues as well. Although it seems like most movies couldn't handle all of that. In fact, most movies can't handle one of those things. Your Name handles it all and makes a really kind of wonderful teenage anime fantasy presented by director Makoto Shinkai, who brings us a really wonderful kind of animated teenage body swap fantasy that ends up doing a lot more than most teenage films could even dream of, and probably becomes one of the great teen films of this era. A young teenage girl who is living in the country town of Tormi, I think, and she hates the countryside town, and then says kind of out loud she wishes to be a handsome Tokyo boy in her next life, and then one day wakes up as a high school boy living in Tokyo and sees his life and sees the chances he has and how wonderful Tokyo can really be, and what's it like living in Tokyo as a young boy, and then wakes up again in her own body, and they soon realize they are swapping bodies kind of at random after they go to sleep, her waking up as him waking up as her, and the various problems, and how he's always grabbing her boobs every time he wakes up as her, how she's actually kind of grabbing his penis every time she wakes up as him, and kind of the obvious things from that. And they leave each other various messages and ways to kind of make ground rules for one another so they don't mess up their lives too much, until eventually the body swapping stops, and they have to kind of figure out how to meet each other and the complications with that, and all sorts of time loopy crazy ideas that are going on as they can barely remember one another, as they feel like they're forgetting one another, as they had this very unique experience together that is changing their lives. They're afraid that will be forgotten, so they're trying to find one another and find exactly why this happened, and how comets are also involved. Makoto Shinkai, there's a lot of talk of him being the new Miyazaki. I kind of don't like to throw that term around, because it does feel like you're just kind of going like, oh, he's big, so he's like Miyazaki. This film isn't really flow-wise like a Miyazaki film. Most animation directors in Japan are influenced by Miyazaki. He's a large figure in animation and film in general, and has a large influence. However, this isn't a film I would say is someone who's going to replace Miyazaki, although financially, and this film is such a gigantic hit in Japan, financially I think he is the next Miyazaki. I'm not going to argue that. Artistically, this film reminds me a lot more of The Girl Who Left Through Time and the director Mamoru Hosoda, and his work really, particularly everything it does with teenagers and identity and time travel and teenage issues, and does that all very, very well, both the supernatural fantastical elements and the teenage drama of it all as well. This film is actually kind of is on a tightrope the whole time, because the flow of it's very odd. There are often times where I was watching and go, oh, so this is the end, and I'd be happy with this being the end of the movie, and then it has another part, and I'm like, at first I'm like, oh man, is this where I'm not gonna like this thing? And then it keeps going, and I keep liking what's going on. It was kind of amazing, and it tips into melodrama in a lot of places and gets close to being too melodramatic, but never gets there. It's kind of excellent what he's doing with this. I haven't seen a lot of films by this director, and makes me curious to see more, because I like the naturalness of it, how it's kind of a slice of life anime, but also kind of being a fantastical one as well. If it's going to remind me of any Studio Ghibli, it's probably when Marnie was there, because the whole idea of time travel and meeting someone from a different era, understanding someone from a different background, having having a teen being very involved in that and getting kind of swept up in this fantastical thing that's happened to them really reminds me of When Marnie Was There, which I think most people forget about When Marnie Was There, but it was a good movie. Your Name kind of does all that in such a magnificent, wonderful way. It's more of a populist kind of anime than I've really seen, which is interesting, especially the teen drama-ness of it, but particularly how it cares more about its characters than really anything else. That's probably why it's such a success. I don't know if I think it's as good as it's doing financially, but I kind of understand it in a certain regard because all the various crazy things that are going on in this aren't specifically sat down and explained and very laboriously explained to you in a way that would be boring and take you out of it. You're almost caring more about like what they're doing to each other's lives in kind of a natural way. And I think that's one of the things that makes this body swap film work so well, because if you watch a film like, let's take Freaky Friday for example, if you transformed into someone, and not to be a pervert, but you wouldn't grab your butt and go like, I'm young, I'm old, you'd grab, you know, if you were a guy turning into a girl, you'd grab her boobs. I don't know how you'd say that. I don't think Grammar figured out how to talk in body swap grammar, but you'd grab the boobs that are in front of you, and if you were a girl turning into a boy, you want to touch this penis thing or whatever. There's kind of a naturalness to that, because in a way you kind of know, you'd be like, yeah, that's what you do in that situation. As much as you have films like Wish Upon a Star and Freaky Friday and It's a Girl Boy Thing and countless others that kind of fail to do it, I think Your Name kind of takes a natural idea of it. What would you do? What would you do? You know, how she just walks around Tokyo when she's in this teenage boy's body, how she's just like, I am in Tokyo, I'm going to walk around and just be enamored of it. And it's not as concerned with having wacky setup to wacky setup, it's following the characters and how they would interact, but also brings up this whole idea, and it's very much a thing in foreign film and as countries get more and more developed, and certainly a thing in America as well, but not as much in American film, the idea of the country versus the city, which I guess plays into the election, but whatever, and the idea of the differences between the two. And that is one thing that I don't think a lot of those films get into, is the economic differences between two people if you were to swap them, and how their lives are very different, and how she wants to be in Tokyo. He is fascinated with the guy. I don't think he really wanted to, but he's interested in it, and how that's changing their perspective and changing them, and how if you're seeing that perspective, it will change you. Debating the whole nature versus nurture, fate versus free will kind of an idea, and changing your fate because you're having the free will to experience all these different things is a fascinating thing to do, is particularly when you're talking about a body swap kind of a thing. And Your Name gets into all of that, which I find really wonderful. It's like a concept it's such an interesting idea in so many ways, and Your Name gets the interestingness of it. It has a really strong beginning part about that, but then has this whole other section that I almost don't want to get into. But what I will say about it, it's interesting that I think this generation in Japanese film is going to have so much to talk about with the earthquake in 2011. In fact, the last newer Japanese film I saw in theaters was Shin Godzilla, which also had a lot to do with that. And although that film was a little more interesting than like good, Your Name does it more of a covert way, because talking about kind of natural disasters, talking about saving people, talking about your responsibility in terms of that, brings up a lot to do with something that everyone in Japan just went through and just suffered from. And, you know, not to be a crazy climate change person, but as climate change and natural disasters happen more frequently, this is something that I think with Your Name that will probably resonate more with future generations, and something that, you know, maybe I'm wrong and maybe nothing will happen, but as that continues to happen, I think it's going to show a side that Japan's more ready for than American film will eventually come around to. But honestly, I hope I'm wrong about that. I would like to be wrong. That's something I wouldn't mind being wrong about, but I think Your Name goes into that as well. Makoto Shinkai is a director who really wasn't on my radar. I really knew nothing about him. I don't see every anime that comes out. Unfortunately, I would like to see more. But I think what he does with Your Name is quite fascinating. Brings up a lot of teenage issues, but issues of self-discovery and issues of wealth and issues of identity and issues in Japan, but almost has such an interesting flow and an interesting feel to it. And I think Your Name brings up so many different issues about it. I don't know if I'm as in love with this film as seemingly everyone else is. I quite liked it. I think I prefer The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. I think that's maybe a tighter film. I will admit that I think this is a pretty good movie. It's probably one of my favorite teen films I've seen this year and in recent memory. Not just because it's a great fantasy, not just because it's fun. I guess the only thing I really didn't like is the music by J-rock band Rad Wimps. I don't really know them, but I didn't really like a lot of the music in it. That I didn't love, but I think the emotion and what it's trying to say and using its concept so well really makes Your Name quite an unforgettable experience, kind of a universal one. You know, I think one of the things that brings out other genres is doing a story so well and in such a great way that almost no one can deny it, and maybe that's certainly why Your Name kind of has a more universal quality to it. It has all these interesting dips and turns to it, almost has a minimized crazy cult movie going on within it, but kind of brought to a populace appeal, and I think that's why Your Name kind of has this sensation quality to it, because it's so kind of different but also feels like nothing you've maybe seen before. But the whole fantasy element, it reminds me of other things, but I think it's kind of its own in terms of how more interested he is in kind of these interesting melodrama avenues to go into, but almost not going full like crazy melodrama, kind of just tipping his toes in it and saying things about a lot of issues, but being able to handle it. It's almost an epic in terms of all the different things it goes through in this movie. It's quite remarkable. This film might have some crossover appeal. I think people are probably going to discover it more throughout DVD and streaming and whatever it ends up being released on over time, but Your Name is a beautiful, wonderful teen fantasy, and if you've been waiting to see the next great teen movie to come along this year, I think this is probably the number one film I've seen from that and shows a great deal of emotional and amazing promise. There might be better teen fantasy sci-fi type of films and better written ones, but Your Name kind of captures that in a wonderful kind of way that I think teens will probably get more than I will, and don't really care how well the screenplay is or anything, but can get that kind of emotion and love story and everything that's going on and well balanced to make it such a wonderful fantasy of emotion picture. And it's kind of a glorious thing he got all these pieces to work out in the way they did to make Your Name as special as it really is. So if you have seen Your Name and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Your Name and how fucking stupid it sounds.